So if Tom DeWeese, Mr. Tom DeWeese is ready, I'd like him to step up here. This man has been fighting Agenda 21 for a good 20 years. As a matter of fact, when I first got involved, his website was one of the first places I went, and I actually got permission from Tom to copy some of his tapes with some lectures he gave, and tried to pass them out back in Hiram when they were trying to bring the comprehensive plan there. You know, you can tell people the truth, but how they perceive it and whether they believe it, or if they take the time to listen to you, is one thing. I know at one time this was thought to be some conspiracy theory baloney, but it's not. It never has been. I mean, it was in the news, and it's happening. So, without any further ado, I'd like to present Mr. Tom DeWeese of the American Policy Center.
In the interest of complete transparency and openness, I would like to let you know who you're dealing with. My name is Tom DeWeese, and according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, I am a domestic terrorist. We've been talking, those of us who keep getting nominated for such an honor, that what we should do every year is have a black tie dinner to honor the latest inductees. I think we're going to do that. My act together here. Well, I know that you're all aware of Agenda 21, and I'm going to take just a half of my talk. I'm going to kind of give you a background, give you some historic information and some of the things that are happening with it. Second half, I want to give you some new tools on how to fight back, some new things we've come up with. For 18 years, as we were fighting Agenda 21, almost everything we produced, all of our videos, all of our handouts, everything were, listen to me, what this is. And everything was geared that way. But finally, a couple of years ago, I started getting notes from people saying, okay, I get it. What do I do about it? And I said, gee, I don't know. I never got that far before. So we've been busy trying to rectify that problem, and I think you're going to like some of the things we've come up with. So, you know, obviously across the country there's a great controversy about Agenda 21 and its policy of sustainable development. In nearly every community in the nation, there is now a debate raging over rules and regulations that are changing the face of our towns and our nation. But just mention Agenda 21 in most public meetings, and elected officials will quickly put you down and accuse you of spreading conspiracy theories. Why? What's it all about? Why the denials? What is Agenda 21 and why is that a threat? Well, as we just established, that I've been at the center of this fight for over 20 years. So let me give you just a quick explanation of this explosive issue, and at least, from my perspective. For the past 3 decades, the UN and a host of environmental organizations, many of which are accredited and partially funded by the UN, have convinced much of the world that the planet is on its last legs. They warn us that we will surely perish unless government enacts powerful rules and regulations that force people to behave in a specific way. They believe that the only way to fix the problem is to control the flow of resources and wealth, which literally means changing human civilization and the way we live. The problem is, this forced transformation of our society necessarily leads to a thirst for power. I think Tom has very well explained what happens with that thirst for power, a top-down control that can eventually lead to tyranny. And we're seeing that today. And today, we're seeing vast changes in our society, not for the good. People find themselves no longer secure on their own property. People are being arrested for doing things on their property that was once their obvious right. but now is in violation of hidden, confusing regulations that result in fines and even imprisonment. For example, in Orrin, Utah, Betty Perry was arrested, handcuffed, and put in a holding tank because the grass in her front yard had died. Violation, said the local zoning enforcement officer. Photographs of Betty videotaped after this happened showed a mark on her nose. That's where the chains from the handcuffs hit her in the nose as they threw her into the squad car. Julie Bass in Oak Park, Michigan, wanted to plant an organic garden in her yard. She even asked the mayor and the city council if it was okay, and they all said yes, of course. But as she went to work, she too was arrested by the local zoning enforcement officer and faces 90 days in jail. In Dade County, Florida, 1,500 people are losing their homes due to land use regulations. In King County, Washington, 17,000 residents have petitioned their local government to change land use policies that have resulted in a loss of 65% of their private property. In Fauquier County, Virginia, where I reside, organic farmer Martha Bonetta is facing multiple fines of $5,000 as her small farm store has been closed down, all for holding a children's birthday party on her own land without the proper permit. This birthday party was for 10-year-old girls. She was not paid to use her facility for it. They were friends, and they found a photograph on Facebook of the party and used that as evidence against her for using her property in violation. And most recently, you'll find this interesting, Tom. Martha is suffering an IRS audit. Now, isn't it interesting that this is all driven by an organization called the Piedmont Environmental Council? They control 9 counties in our area. They are funded by the landed gentry horsey people, the people who want to keep all the open space so they can have their fox hunts, the Dows, the DuPonts, the rest of them. Interestingly enough, one person on their board of directors is the lady who was Bill Clinton's attack dog at the IRS when he was president, auditing conservative organizations. She now is on the board of directors of the Piedmont Environmental Council, and all of a sudden, Martha has an IRS audit. And what does this lady say? Oh, it's just a coincidence. Now, you add to these reports the 2 women who were arrested in Naperville, Illinois, by police for trying to protect their property from smart meter installations, and then you begin to understand that something is very wrong with our government. Even if you believe there needs to be changes in our society to protect the environment, surely any honest American would admit that such actions by government are out of line. And that's why I and thousands more across the nation now are so concerned. You know, the standard points by those who promote the policy of sustainable development and its planning process are these. You'll hear them every time they talk. Local planning is a local idea. Agenda 21 is a non-binding resolution, not a treaty, so it carries no legal authority, which means any nation, that no nation is bound to act. It has no teeth. And they will tell you that the UN has no enforcement capability. They'll tell you that planners are simply honest professionals trying to do their job, and all these protests are wasting their valuable time. Shame on you. The main concern of Agenda 21, they tell us, is that man is fouling the environment and using up resources for future generations, and we just need a sensible plan to preserve and protect the earth. So what's so bad about that? And their latest one, from the American Planning Association, they keep telling us now over and over again, there is no hidden agenda. Now, why do they think that we would think there's a hidden agenda? Of course, you know, how many of you have talked to liberals? I use them as an example. Who always will tell you how open-minded they are. They just want to know the truth, and they want to get to the facts. If you start to tell them about Agenda 21, well, by golly, they want to go check it out. And they'll tell you this: I've read Agenda 21, and I can find no threatening language that says it's a global plot. What are you so afraid of? How many documents do we have coming out of the Agenda 21? It says across the top secret, this is a global plot. And of course, the most often heard response, Agenda 21? What's that? Well, let me begin with some history. In 1976, the United Nations held the first of a series of what they call habitat conferences, designed to lay the groundwork for international policy on how human society should be developed. The report delivered from the Habitat 1 conference told the world that for human society to move forward, it must give up the concept of private property ownership. Specifically, it said this: land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset, controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership, it also says, is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. Now, keep this term in your mind: social injustice, social justice, social equity. The logo of Sustainable Development Agenda 21 is 3 connecting circles. One marked environment, one marked equity, one marked economy or economics. 3 E's. The environment is the excuse to put it all in place. You know, the Marxists tried for decades and decades to get us to accept the genius of Karl Marx, and we weren't doing it. So they wrapped it all in a little green blanket of environmental Armageddon, and Americans started throwing their liberties on the bonfire like a good old-fashioned book burning. That's what has happened. The economy, of course, is bringing business together and public-private partnerships right out of the Mussolini fascist playbook. But social equity is the real force behind Agenda 21. In other words, if you own land, it's not fair to those who don't. The concept of social justice became the driving force behind implementation of this policy. Social justice, or social equity, requires that the world's wealth be shared between those who produce and those who don't. Redistribution of wealth is the driving force behind Agenda 21. Here's an example of how it works. I got this example from one of them. Actually, in an interview, this person actually said this to describe what social justice is. He said, if a person is evicted for not paying their rent, well, that's the law. If a person couldn't pay the rent because they couldn't afford to get a good education to help them get a good paying job, well, that is social injustice. You see the insanity of this? David Brower, Friends of the Earth, major UN NGO, said, quote, "The goal now is a socialist redistributionist society which is nature's proper role, nature's proper steward, and society's only hope." In short, social equity, social justice means a forced utopia with promises of health care for all, jobs for all, housing for all, and equality for all. It's just a kumbaya hug right out of the 60s, isn't it? It all sounds familiar. Well, it's interesting to note that Karl Marx was the first to coin the phrase social justice. Do you need to know more? The 1976 Agreement on Habitat 1, including all of these ideas of policy based on social justice and redistribution of wealth, was signed into acceptance for the United States by William Riley, who would later become the head of the Environmental Protection Agency under George H.W. Bush. While it's not a treaty, Riley's signature made the Habitat 1 agreement acceptable policy to the United States. After a series of meetings like this all over the world, finally in 19 1987, the United Nations sponsored the Commission on Global Governance, also called the Brundtland Commission. Its report was called Our Common Future. Here, guys, is what we have planned for you, which concluded that developed nations such as the U.S. were responsible for global warming and poverty, which in turn created an unsustainable planet. The solution was to limit property ownership and economic growth in the U.S. and transfer consumer wealth to developing nations. This is why you saw the exodus of American industry. Regulations, environmental regulations put on the American industry where they could not operate, forced to go to Brazil, to India, to China, to other nations. This is a redistribution of wealth. Now, if it's about protecting the environment, does it matter what country the development is in? Of course not, because it's not about protecting the environment, it's about redistribution of wealth. To effectively understand and fight Agenda 21, you must first and foremost understand the meaning and the intent of their words. Once you can translate the doublespeak into English, then it'll be easy for you to read their documents and find their hidden agenda in every proposed policy. So, first, the needs the report refers to are not human needs. Those are the needs of the planet. The report concludes that the only way to meet them is by eliminating or reducing unsustainable activities globally. These include property ownership, consumerism, high meat intake, use of fossil fuels, roadways, automobiles, dams and pastures, and golf courses. And the UN Biodiversity Treaty, which was also introduced at the same time as Agenda 21, expands the list to include ski runs, grazing of livestock, plowing of soil, building of fences, industry, single-family homes, paved and tarred roads, logging activities, dams and reservoirs, power line construction, and economic systems that fail to set proper value on the environment. Now, what kind of system would that be? Oh yeah, private property ownership and free enterprise. So, in fact, this is the interesting part. The steps to enforcing Agenda 21 assure that we will not meet the needs of today because we've eliminated all of our jobs, all of our ability to create wealth, all of our ability to eat, all in the name of protecting the environment under Agenda 21. As you read the Brundtland report, it becomes clear that it is outlining a complete agenda for the reorganization of human society. It clearly calls for reduction in energy use, elimination of certain kinds of food, including beef consumption. They really hate cows. Severe reduction of space for homes and development, and actually the elimination of nation-states or sovereign nations, to be replaced instead with a central organizing authority to oversee human settlements. Eventually, all of these ideas were worked and reworked in meeting after meeting after meeting. Hundreds and thousands of non-governmental organizations that are authorized by the United Nations to work on these things with their own private agendas came together eventually into one document called Agenda 21 and introduced it at the 1992 Earth Summit. The preamble to the Agenda 21 report, signed by President George H.W. Bush. I'm going to tell you, I have never voted for a Bush in my life, and I never intend to. The preamble to that agenda that he signed outlined the clear purpose of Agenda 21, top-down change of our society. It said, quote, "Humanity stands at a defining moment in history. We are confronted with a perpetuation of disparities between and within nations, a worsening of poverty, hunger, and ill health, and illiteracy, and the continuing deterioration of the ecosystems on which we depend for our well-being. However, integration of environment and development concerns and greater attention to them will lead to the fulfillment of basic needs, improved living standards." If you only have basic needs and you cut out all these other things, how do you get improved living standards? protected and managed ecosystems, and a safer, more prosperous future. No nation can achieve this on its own, but together we can in a global partnership for sustainable development. Now, a year later, the UN put it in a little bit easier language to understand. In a report in 1993, it said, quote, Agenda 21 proposes an array of actions which are intended to be implemented by every person on earth. Did they ask you? Did you vote? No. It's intended for you, everybody. It calls for specific changes in the activities of all people. Effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of all humans, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. Nobody said a word. These two statements encompass the 3 E's of Agenda 21: equity, economy, environment. The agenda is to merge all 3 together in a top-down control of money and land through a process of redistribution of wealth. That is Agenda 21. In fact, a Marxist author named Ted Trainer clearly described the real goal of Agenda 21 in a book he wrote called Transition to a Sustainable and Just World. He said, quote, "The global economy is massively unjust. It delivers most of the world's wealth to the few and rich countries and gears third world productive capacity to rich world supermarkets, not to meeting the needs of the world's poor billions. Rich countries," he explains, "must move down to living on their fair share of global wealth." But, say your local officials, none of this has anything to do with their planning programs. They're all local. They accuse me and others of perpetrating a conspiracy theory full of lies and false accusations that their plans have anything to do with Agenda 21. But as Marxist author Trainer goes on to say, these faults cannot be fixed within or by our society, driven by growth, market forces, production for profit, or affluence. Consumer society cannot be reformed to make it sustainable or just. It must be largely replaced by a society with fundamentally different structures. And he concludes, local planning is based on this theory. You must live on less. You know, when our grandparents, our parents, past generations were living, their entire goal in life was to make the life of their children better than what they had. Today, the entire goal put down by Agenda 21 and those who perpetrated it is to make it worse. Interesting trade. And again, proponents of Agenda 21 publicly dismiss the plan as just an innocuous 20-year-old document that has no enforcement power. I love this. They smugly tell us constantly, there are no blue helmeted troops at City Hall. Well, not yet, anyway. Or, as the American Planning Association says in its document, Glossary for the Public, there is no hidden agenda. This glossary for the public was put together because of us. In a panic, they had to retrain their people how to fight us. And they put together this document. The opening line to it says, what is said or not said is vitally important. And then they started listing a whole bunch of words about what, don't say these words anymore because these crazy Tea Party people keep seeing red. No hidden agenda, by the way. In its Agenda 21 Myths and Facts document found on the APA website, the group goes to extreme measures to distance itself and its policies from Agenda 21, specifically saying, the American Planning Association has no affiliation regarding any policy goals and recommendations of the UN. Really? Well, not so fast, guys. I'd be really interested to hear the APA explain this bit of information found in one of its own documents from 1994. This is is a newsletter published for the Northern California APA members. It was written, and there's an article in here entitled "How Sustainable is Our Planning" by Robert Odlin. It was written just 2 years after the Earth Summit at which Agenda 21 was first introduced to the world. They keep telling us it's an innocuous document that means nothing, dusty. Why do you people keep bringing this up? Well, the 5th paragraph in this article says, quote, Vice President Gore's book, Earth in the Balance, addressed many of the general issues of sustainability. Within the past year, the President's Council on Sustainable Development has been organized to develop recommendations for incorporating sustainability into the federal government. Also, various groups have been formed to implement Agenda 21, a comprehensive blueprint for sustainable development that was adopted at the recent UN conference in Rio de Janeiro, the Earth Summit. Right there. In one paragraph, this document brings together the American Planning Association, Agenda 21, the Earth Summit, Al Gore, Sustainable Development, the President's Council on Sustainable Development, the creation of non-governmental organizations with the mission of implementing Agenda 21 in every community, and a description of Agenda 21 as a comprehensive blueprint for sustainable planning. It sounds like it came verbatim from one of my speeches. A couple of paragraphs higher in the article it says, quote, a common misconception is that sustainability is synonymous with self-sufficiency. On the contrary, it says, sustainability must recognize the interconnections between different levels of societal structure. That societal structure is social justice, as described in Agenda 21. This is an APA document. Now, if you visit a website called plannersnetwork.org, which the APA is a member, you will find in its statement of principles this quote, we believe planning should be a tool for allocating resources and eliminating the great inequalities of wealth and power in our society because the free market has proven incapable of doing this, end quote. This is what your local planners believe. It is what's the basis of the plans they're putting together, and it is Agenda 21. The United Nations blatantly advocates that capitalism and private property rights are not sustainable and pose the single greatest threat to the world's ecosystems and social equity. And as the Planner's Statement of Principles and the APA's own 1994 documents show, the APA is helping communities across the nation enforce these ideas while swearing it is all local, designed from local input. Well, that input comes from you, of course, at public meetings run by facilitators who are trained in psychology with predetermined outcomes to lead you down a path. If they've done their job really well, when they're complete with the meeting, you will think it was your idea. That's your public input. And they keep trying to hide Agenda 21. That would, of course, explain this quote by J. Gary Lawrence, a planner from the city of Seattle and an advisor to the President's Council on Sustainable Development. He said, quote, participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many who would actively work to defeat any elected official undertaking local Agenda 21. So, we will call our plan something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth. As George Orwell masterfully put it in his epic novel Animal Farm, it's becoming difficult to see the difference between the pigs and the farmers, or the APA and the United Nations. So, how's it done? How does the international agenda slip into our nation and into your community without most people, even your elected officials, knowing about it? Here is the exact course that brought Agenda 21 to America, through Congress, through your state legislatures, through your local county and city government, and into your backyard. We start with 50,000 world leaders, non-governmental organizations, government bureaucrats, and 179 heads of state, which signed the agreement to Agenda 21 at the Earth Summit in 1992. Then, the policy gained huge momentum when in 1993, President Bill Clinton issued Executive Order 12852 to create the President's Council on Sustainable Development and made it official U.S. policy. That council issued reports that led to legislation that led to moving Agenda 21 through the federal government. Take a look at who served on that council and you will see many of the same NGOs which helped write Agenda 21 at the UN level, including Jonathan Lash of the World Resources Institute, John Sawhill of the Nature Conservancy, Jay Hare of the National Wildlife Federation, and Michelle Perrault, International Vice President of the Sierra Club. These were all players in the creation of Agenda 21. Now they were openly serving on the President's Council with a specific mission of implementing Agenda 21 into American policy. The President's Council issued an official report which said, we need a collaborative decision process that leads to better decisions, more rapid change, and more sensible use of human, natural, and financial resources in achieving our goals. See, I thought we had like this Congress guys that were supposed to make plans based on what people wanted, but that wasn't good enough. We need a collaborative decision process that leads to better decisions than these stupid congressmen and more rapid change. So, they put it all together. That single statement is the basis for all local planning programs. They decide how you will live in order to reach their goals. Through a series of regulations, executive orders, and grant programs on the federal level, written and published and pushed through Congress by the same NGOs who wrote Agenda 21 at the international level, the policy then filtered down into state governments where those same NGOs, this is the key to it, it's the NGOs with this agenda that surround your elected officials and force them to put these policies together. They got the state legislatures to put together regulations telling every single community in the state that they had to put together a comprehensive development plan. Now you had county commissioners, city councilmen saying, what's a comprehensive development plan? Ah, gee whiz. In comes the NGOs saying, oh golly gee, poor you. The government says, the state government says you've got to put together a comprehensive development plan, but just so happens we've got all these plans to plan in a box. All you got to do is sign here. And we've got the money for you in federal grants that we helped write. Here it is, all right there for you. Sign real hard, press real hard. There's 27 copies. And that is how it filtered from the federal, from the international level, down into your backyard. Grant money is the key. It is how such policy infiltrates every community. Any city that takes the grant money agrees to the strings attached. The strings are controls on energy and water use, controls on development, and much more. Essentially, these programs lead to control of your property and your local economy right out of Agenda 21. But say your local planners, those grants aren't connected to some innocuous UN document. Really? Then please explain this. Report, 1998 Federal Register on the EPA's Sustainable Development Challenge Grant Program. It says, quote, the Sustainable Development Challenge Grant Program is also a step in implementing Agenda 21, the Global Plan for Action on Sustainable Development. And still they deny any UN Agenda 21 connection. Well, is there any one group that's pushing Agenda 21 to local communities? Well, there are actually thousands of them, and they're all making money off of it through these grant programs, some little piece part of it. But there's one that is leading the way above all others, ICLEI. Originally known as the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, ICLEI today calls itself ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. Now, why did they have to get the word international out of their name? Oh, that's right, they're local. ICLEI's mission is to implement Agenda 21 worldwide, and it has been having tremendous success. When local governments contract with ICLEI, they agree to implement the Agenda 21 policy of sustainable development. In fact, these local governments that become members of ICLEI are agreeing to much more than that. It's important to note that ICLEI's charter asks that its individual members in individual member cities adopt Earth Charter principles to guide local action. The Earth Charter is an international declaration first introduced to the world in 1997, written by a task force headed by former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and head of the Earth Summit, Maurice Strong. The Earth Charter calls for the emergence of a global civil society and states that our environmental, economic, political, social, and spiritual challenges are interconnected. There's the 3 E's again. By the way, talk about the double speak, understand how to know what they're saying to you. Civil society. Now to you, that means people. Got to go inside the UN. Civil society to them is the NGOs. In their mind, in their plans, the Nature Conservancy, the Audubon Society, the Sierra Club, the National Education Association, Planned Parenthood, and yada, 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 on, represent you. That's civil society. They are actually talking in the UN about doing away with the Security Council, the one place where the United States has a veto power over craziness. Eliminate that, because obviously it's in their way, and replacing it with a gathering of the people. And that's not the official term, I can't remember this, but it's what it is, who's going to be there, are the civil society, the NGO groups. They will now be, on the global governance, they will now be Congress of the people, representing you. Better start paying those Sierra Club dues. You know, ICLEI comes into your community. It supplies the tools to fully indoctrinate employees at City Hall to assure that only sustainability policies are considered. And that's how energy quotas and land use policies are created. You will find these NGO groups, including ICLEI, are their members are employees who work for the county or for the city. Sometimes the county commissioners, city councilmen are their members, and all they do is sit there and do this. And ICLEI doesn't just stick around to City Hall. You may find them lurking around the local school board, helping to integrate into formal education and lifelong learning programs the knowledge, values, and skills for a sustainable way of life. Now, during the 1990s, most of my time was spent trying to stop School to Work, Goals 2000, Workforce Development Boards. I was banned from congressmen's offices. I was attacked on the floor of the House. And I was told by a Republican congressman the Workforce Development Boards, which would have industry decide what curriculums needed to make the proper workers for the future. He said, isn't that the Republican way to bring business in? No, that's Mussolini's way. But you get it. All those programs in education today have come down into something new they're introducing. It's not new, it's all the same. New name, Common Core. It's the latest incarnation of such government indoctrination programs uniting its education curriculum. The goal is to assure your children are pliable, global village idiots. You will never see in Common Core promotional materials words like freedom, capitalism, American exceptionalism, constitutional republic, or God. But you will see, repeated over and over again, words like social and environmental justice, sustainability, global this or that, democracy, and government. Use that word a lot. That is your children's future. Federal and state grants, programs lobbied for and perhaps written by groups like ICLEI, spread the agenda even as they deny it exists. But keep in mind, it's very important, your community does not have to be an ICLEI member to be affected by Agenda 21 and its policies. I get letters from people saying, oh, we don't have it here, we aren't members of ICLEI. Doesn't matter. It's in every single community. The American Planning Association is in every single community, and they are hand in hand with ICLEI spreading this. There are thousands, there's more than 2,000 NGO groups around the country, including APA. Nearly every town uses the American Planning Association's they've got a booklet called Growing Smart. It's a Growing Smart guidebook is what it's called. It translates Agenda 21 into local language. You'll find this in every single community. These groups work hand in hand with government organizations, like the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which, by the way, has already accepted the Earth Charter as its official policy. Let me explain something to you about I didn't mention this, about the Earth Charter. You know, by studying our government, that we have two founding documents. We have the Declaration of Independence and we have the Constitution of the United States. The Declaration of Independence declares our beliefs, declares what our founding is, what we're about, how we want government to be, how we see ourselves as free because our rights are ours from birth, from God. And government's job is to protect those rights. The Constitution, part of it, is here's how we'll do it. The same is true with the UN. The Earth Charter is that statement of principles of what we want. Agenda 21 is how we get it. Other groups, besides the Conference of Mayors, the National Governors Association, the National League of Cities, the National Association of County Administrators, and many more that your elected representatives belong to. The planners bring pre-written programs and regulations directly to your elected officials, saving them the trouble of having to write the plans. It's all organized for them. There are international regulations for plumbing, electrical wiring, building codes, development codes, energy use, water use, traffic calming. You know what traffic calming is? You drive down the street, it's got these speed bumps in it, and you kind of go up this side, down this side, these huge speed bumps. You can hardly get down the street. That's traffic calming. What they really want to do is, every time you get down the street, you think, oh man, I got to go down the street, go up and down this thing again. And you're sitting at home and you're saying, oh, I need to go to the grocery. I'm not going to go. I don't want to do this again. Or I'm going to walk. That's the point. They want you to walk. They want you to take your bicycle. The bicycle is going to go around the things. So that's traffic calming. And of course, there's the ever popular bike lanes. So if you're going up and down on speed bumps and the bicycle gets in your way, you're really ready to get out of the car. Your elected officials, with all this provided for them, don't have to think. They just have to hit the rubber stamp, and like magic, you have a whole new local government. Is it any wonder that they walk around in a daze denying they have anything to do with Agenda 21? The truth of the matter is, most of them don't have a clue. And what are the results of this internationally created, federally funded, and state-enforced assault on your local community and your home? Private property rights are disappearing. Energy costs are skyrocketing. Jobs are disappearing. Community development means pack and stack high-rise housing. And bike paths, of course, are infringing on roads, making it more difficult to drive cars. Wetlands, conservation easements, watersheds, viewsheds, rails to trails, biosphere reserves, greenways, carbon footprints, partnerships, preservation, stakeholders, land use, environmental protection, development, diversity, visioning, open space, heritage areas, and comprehensive planning are all part of the new language of government. The function of legitimate elected government within the sustainable system is fast becoming little more than a rubber stamp to create and enforce the dictates of something called stakeholder councils, run by, you guessed it, the same NGO organizations that wrote Agenda 21 in the first place. Again, the doublespeak. Stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders in the community? Aren't they the people who live there? Aren't they the people who These are people who don't even live there. They arrive, they invade, and they suddenly set themselves up as stakeholders, and they surround your elected officials because they've got money, they've got political influence, and they've got a plan. They're the stakeholders, not you. It is the demise of representative government, and the councils appear and grow almost overnight. You'll find watershed councils that regulate human action near every trickling stream, river, or lake. They'll put meters on water wells. Special action councils control home size, tree pruning, and or removal, even the color you can paint your home or the height of your grass. And that's how innocent victims, like Betty Perry I talked about in the beginning, go to jail and handcuffs because their grass died. Historic preservation councils control development in downtown areas, disallowing expansion and new building. Once the councils are established, it becomes much more difficult to discuss issues with your elected representatives. Instead, they will automatically refer you to the proper council, administration, or department run by unresponsive appointed hacks armed with their own political agenda. You go to your city councilman and ask them about a problem. I don't know anything about it. Go over to the planning commission. Talk to them over there. That's how it's all done now. Regional governments are driven by the NGOs and the stakeholder councils. These are run by non-elected bureaucrats that don't answer to the people. They could care less what your problem is. And few regional plans mention the potential for property rights infringements or the higher taxes that result, and none of the existing regional plans offer any protection against these losses. Now, our founders knew so well. The farther government gets from the people, the less responsive it is to our interests. One of the most popular tools now to control energy use is the energy audit and building review. They establish quotas for electrical use, for heating and cooling pumps, and water use. That means that the government bureaucrats may come into your home or your office building and determine the amount of potential energy that you should be allowed to have. You will be given a list of recommendations necessary to bring your home into compliance. This may include the need for a new roof, new energy efficient appliances, new windows, etc. And to comply may cost you thousands of dollars. In Oakland, California, they did this. The average cost to a homeowner to comply with their regulations was $35,000. As groups like ICLEI and the American Planning Association guide the process, voluntary guidelines announced to reduce energy use quickly become mandatory regulations as dictated through the grant programs. And how do they control energy use? Well, one way, you all know, across the nation, power companies in partnership with government planners are forcing the use of smart meters. These meters contain RFID chips. The technology enables the power companies to keep track of how much power you are using and control, regulate, and ration the use of that electricity. And now we're finding that there are great health hazards involved there. There's also massive invasion of your personal privacy. They can tell your routine in the morning. They can tell how many people are in your home. They can tell how much energy you use and when. You have absolutely no say about it. There are now policies being advocated to place taxes on the use of toilet paper and on the number of miles you drive. It is a major issue being worked in the Obama administration right now. They already have the boxes on the cars that measure how far you drive. Their only debate now is they're trying to decide who's going to read those meters and who's going to send out the bills for the mileage that you drive. They are talking about if you go in for a state inspection, they'll read it then, and they'll send you a bill for how many miles you drove. The EPA is now providing funding to NGO groups to run training programs for people to photograph and report neighbors who may be committing crimes against the environment. Last year, of course, Obama signed Executive Order 13575 to create the White House World Council. The council is a list of the most aggressive agencies and departments of the U.S. government. It will bring an army of regulators into rural areas to completely control every decision of land use, farming, and development. Sustainable farming practices can only follow strict guidelines set down by government bureaucrats. They dictate how crops are to be grown, how much energy, water, or fertilizer can be used, even which crops can be grown. Farmers, who have been feeding Americans for over 200 years, plus the world, we might add, will not be able to make a single decision without permission and massive paperwork from bureaucrats from at least 25 agencies, and I would venture to say not a single one of those bureaucrats has ever been on the farm in his life. It's going to tell a farmer what he has to do. This is direct enforcement of sustainable farming, and I'm going to tell you, sustainable farming is not organic farming. Some people mix those terms up. Organic farming is natural farming. Sustainable farming is a political control of farming. And the result will only be food shortages and higher prices. The governor of Maryland is enforcing an agenda called Plan Maryland that will lock away over 400,000 acres of land, banned from any development. One of the key provisions is a policy to ban septic tanks. The excuse, we have to protect the Chesapeake Bay. There's nothing that says, there's no report anywhere that says septic tanks have caused any problem in the Chesapeake Bay or anywhere else. The only result of this ban will be to make it impossible to live in rural areas. Getting people off the rural lands and into the cities is the real purpose, not environmental protection. But of course, when we talk about the Wildlands Project as a major aspect of Agenda 21, with the stated purpose of removing people from the rural lands and herding them into the cities, we're just accused of spreading silly conspiracy theories. Several cities are now taking grant money to create a plug-in development program with your tax dollars to assure the city is ready for electric cars. The program openly admits that it's all necessary because otherwise people won't buy plug-in vehicles. Just ask Chevy how the Volt's doing. People don't want them. You know, at least under the free enterprise system, the oil companies paid for their own filling stations after free Americans made their own choice about what kind of car they wanted to buy. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the utopia of sustainable development. The fact is, we oppose Agenda 21 and sustainable development because it was specifically designed not to protect the environment, but to change the very structure of our government. It was designed to harmonize the United States and other free countries into a one-size-fits-all global structure, eliminating sovereign nations. Through the establishment of the non-elected councils and regional governments, they are creating a government structure that essentially eliminates our precious style of representative government of the people. And they are replacing it with a vicious, backroom, corruption-infested cronyism between non-elected, self-professed stakeholders and non-governmental organizations pushing their preconceived agenda through power-hungry, greedy, or just plain ignorant politicians. The question now, how do we stop it? First, we must fully understand the nature of the threat we face. The fact is, this is a political movement led by those who seek to control the economy, dictate development, and redistribute wealth. They use the philosophical base of Karl Marx, the tactics of Adolf Hitler, and the rhetoric of the Sierra Club. Basically, everything connected with sustainable development translates to higher costs, shortages, and sacrifice. The danger is in the process. Sustainability policies are being forced on unsuspecting citizens. They use predetermined outcomes and group manipulation tactics to force their way into the local policy. Some citizens have actually been thrown out of public meetings by armed guards simply because they want to discuss how a regulation is going to affect their property or their livelihood. Our job is to turn it around on them and make them the focus of the debate, not you. So what do we do about it? Let me give you some very specific guidelines and one very important tool that we've developed to fight Agenda 21 and sustainable development. First of all, I shouldn't have said Agenda 21. I mean to say only sustainable development. I know that I've just spent the last several minutes telling you the origins of this policy. And I do that to provide you with knowledge about the policy that you seek to stop. However, It is not necessary that you dash down to your local county commissioners and breathlessly accuse them of enforcing a UN agenda. That's how we get awarded our tinfoil hats and thrown out of meetings for our trouble. Stop doing that as of today. Second, do not attempt this policy alone. If at all possible, they are very good at ignoring and marginalizing one or two people. You need others to help you carry out a planned strategy. Third, before you do anything, research, understand exactly what you are up against. Put your plans together ahead of time before you ever say a word to anybody about fighting this. Don't even begin to open up the fight until you know certain details. Who are the players involved in your community? The people leading the policy. What privately funded stakeholders, NGO groups are there? Get to know what you can about them. Other towns that they've worked in. Policies that they've spearheaded. Where are they from? Where do their funds come from? Now, people keep asking me, and a very good question here, how do we know they're there? How do we know who they are? There really is no way to find, they're not going to be listed usually. Sometimes they are, but usually they're not. You have to go to the meetings. You have to go to the planning meetings. You have to go to the council meetings. You have to go to the county commissioner meetings. And you can watch and see. You will see as they're discussing policy. Sometimes they're the ones introducing the policy. Sometimes as the policy is being discussed, they're referring to somebody. Somebody's giving them advice. Who is that? It's one of the stakeholders. You've got to observe. You've got to dig down. You've got to get in there. This information will help you set the direction of your fight, but do it quietly. Don't issue a press release saying, we're going after it. Just put your plan together first. And if you have to ask questions that raise eyebrows, try to not make a target of yourself. Just try to stay as much as possible in the background. Get all the details of the development plan being prepared in your community. What you're really looking for here is, what is it you're upset about? What is happening in your community that's upsetting you? What is the specific policy? And focus on that policy. Don't try to paint it all Agenda 21. We do that in shorthand. We talk among ourselves that way. We know that. But don't do that in public. Look at it and say, this is going to affect my property. This is going to make my energy costs go up. This is going to make it more difficult to drive down my street. This is going to affect my neighbors in some way. And as you're looking at those policies, begin to think about who is the real victim here. Who is really victimized by these policies? It may be everybody in town. It might be just people over here in this neighborhood. You need to find that out, because this is how you begin to recruit other people to your side. The victims are the very first people who ought to be joining with you on this. And by the way, liberals own houses too. They don't really want to have their property taken. They don't care about yours, but they really don't want to have their property usurped. So there's also an opportunity to find a way to bring them involved here if they can. Once you've done these things, then you're ready to start. You're looking at specific issues. I mentioned a few of them. Another one that is huge across the country right now are conservation easements. Conservation easements, once a farmer has signed on for conservation easement and sold his development rights, he may put some money in his pocket. He'll be told that this is going to allow him to keep his farm for the rest of his life. He'll always be able to farm it. He'll always be able to do what he's always done, leave it to his family. All of those things are absolute lies. Once he signed the conservation easement, he has now rendered his property worthless, because there's not a sane individual in this world that will buy that property at that point. You can't sell it. He's going to find out, all of a sudden there's all kinds of regulations of what he's not allowed to do. They may tell him what crops he can grow, or how he grows them, what kind of fertilizers and so forth he can use, or he can do it if he can do it at all. We had a gentleman in Maryland, or in Pennsylvania, an elderly gentleman who thought he was saving his family farm and signed the conservation easement, took some of the money he got from it, and he built his dream home on his property. 5 He wasn't allowed to do that. And he had to stand in his front yard and watch as the bulldozers pushed over his brand new home. This is how vicious these people are. I mentioned Martha Bonetta at the beginning in my county. My county has 32% of its county. It's a very rural county. It is supposed to be there to help the farmers. We love the farmers and local farmers. 32% of the land is in conservation easements. You know how much of that is private farmland of individual small farmers? 2%. What's the rest of it? As I mentioned, the landed gentry horsey people who want to keep the land open for their fox hunts. They lament openly new people coming into the county who don't understand their history and they want to, and their culture, and they put fences up on their land and don't even have the courtesy to put a fence, put a gate in the fence so they can open it and ride through on their horses. This is the attitude they have. They're using sustainable development policies, all to protect the environment, to protect development and so forth, for their own private needs, and that's exactly what it's about. And they are vicious in what they're doing. The other thing is with conservation easements is that once they've taken this much land off the tax rolls, what happens? Other people have to make up the shortage and your taxes go up. Now, these are just some examples, but your goal is to stop sustainable development in your community. That means a campaign to stop the creation of non-elected regional government councils that are difficult to hold accountable. It means to stop local governments from taking state and federal grants that come from massive strings attached to enforce compliance. And it means you must succeed in removing outsider organizations and stakeholders groups that are pressuring your elected officials to do their bidding. You're ready for some civic action. Now, first thing you need to do as you're prepared for civic action, as you begin to try to complain about programs, is define your terms. One of the problems that we have with some of the resolutions, some of the legislation that's being passed around the country, in state legislatures and so forth, they say, we're opposed to Agenda 21 and we're going to protect property rights. What does that mean? The other side never uses the term Agenda 21. They'll say, oh, no, this is just local, so it doesn't matter. Property rights. 40 years ago, people understood step across that line and suffer consequences. 40 years ago, people understood my home is my castle. Today, that sounds violent. That sounds selfish. That's not social justice. And with all the invasion of private property, we don't understand what you're talking about. They all have their own idea. So you have to have definitions of property. We've prepared some documents. The booklet that I have back on our table has everything I'm telling you here. It has the definition of property rights based on John Locke's ideas of private property, which we felt fit best because that's what influenced our founding fathers. So we used that. Now, let me do this. Can I come down in front here with this? Can I take this down, come down in front with that? Wherever. Do that. I need 5 volunteers. I need your help. 5 people come up here. I'm going to show you what you do in a county commissioner's office. I'm electing you county commissioner.
All right.
I'm electing you.
Let's disagree. We didn't vote on that.
This is a dictatorship.
Okay.
Welcome to America. I'm electing you county commissioner. Now you're not going to complain anymore because I'm electing you county commissioner.
Okay. I took the bribe.
Hey, Mary.
All my county commissioners. Now, put yourself, first of all, in the shoes of these people. Okay. Did you get approval for that? Now, our county commissioners, for the most part, when they run for office, are good people. They got involved because they wanted to help the community. They wanted to do something good. Now, what did we do with them the day they were elected? Right as soon as they're elected, we have these national organizations that we send them to. And they go there. What do they hear when they're there? They're hearing from the same NGOs and stakeholders I'm talking about, speaking from the podium. They've got sample legislation. They've got all these ideas. They put all this together, and they send your county commissioners home with that information. They come home, and who's there to greet them? Oh yeah, those same NGOs, organizations, who also have all those plans together, and they begin to work on them. Now, I need somebody else to come up here. One more person. Before I'm done, you're all going to be up here. Come on. Okay, here we go. Now, here's your county commission. Now, just stand right here. Here's your county commission, and you have a problem with the policies that are put in place. And you come to them, and what do you say to them when you have this problem? You're familiar with Agenda 21? You following this sustainable development? So your problem, you say to them, gentlemen, you are bringing sustainable development, bringing UN international policy into our community. They have never heard this. What happens from that point? I need 4 more people. 4 more people. This is the important part. You are the Sierra Club. You are the American Planning Association. You are Hickley. And you are your local environmental organization. Yeah. Well, fight among yourselves. Now, the 4 of you stand behind your county commissioners. Now, here's how it works, ladies and gentlemen. What's your first name? Gary. Gary comes to the county. He's been to our meetings. He's heard Tom DeWeese talk. And he comes in here and he says, you are implementing Agenda 21. You are, it's international policies. What you don't see at that meeting are these shadows standing behind them. And what are they doing? They're saying, this guy is nuts. Pay no attention to him. We've got the plans. You don't have to listen to him. You know we've already discussed the fact that these plans are going to be better for the community. We've got money for your next campaign. Pay no attention to this guy. You know how many long hours we spent putting all this together? And this comes from your United States government. That's where the grants came from. It doesn't have an international thing here. It's only local. There is no hidden agenda. So what do your county commissioners say when Gary comes in and says you're introducing Agenda 21? What do you say, county commissioners? Get out of here.
Never heard of it.
Yeah. Okay. Now, here's the new way to handle this. When you get that 3 minutes before your county commissioners, you stand before them. You say, gentlemen, as you're bringing these plans and these planners into our community, I just have one question for you. What guarantees do I have that you'll protect my private property rights? Simple as that. You have not attacked Agenda 21. You haven't attacked the planners standing behind them. You ask the one question that every property owner in the county wants the answer to. And what do you say? How many of you county commissioners are property owners? How many of you? How many property owners? Okay. You're all property owners? Here's what you're going to say when we ask that question. You're going to say, well, of course we'll protect your private property rights. I'm a property owner too. Of course, we're not going to do anything to hurt that. And this is the fun part. You just smile and say, I'm really happy to hear you say that. But gentlemen, I'd like to have it in writing, please. This is a document that we've created called a resolution to protect citizens' property rights. And all it says is, if you're going to do something to Gary's property that will affect him, you're going to bring Gary into the discussion. You're going to have him be part of it so he knows what's happening and understand what's going on. You've consulted him as well, because you know what? He owns the property. It's his. He's paying the taxes on it. He's paying the mortgage on it. And these people back here have no stake in his holding. Now, what's going to happen at that point? Well, probably, we did this in Southern Virginia. I have a lady who had a very bad relationship with her county commissioners because she's been fighting Agenda 21 for a long time. So she comes, I asked her to be my guinea pig. She comes before her county commission and she says, "Gentlemen, I'd like to start a new paradigm in our relationship." I thought that was pretty good to start out. And then she says, "As you're bringing these plans and these planners into our community, what guarantees do I have to protect our private property rights?" And every one of them stood up and said, "Of course we will." She said, "I'm glad to hear you say that." She started to read the document and they stopped her halfway through and they said, "We'll take it under advisement." And she said, "Okay." And she came back the next week and she said, "Gentlemen, I gave you a document last week. What do you say?" The head of the county commissioner said, "I can't sign that document." Why? Here's the most radical question in the English language. Why? Let him talk. He said, "I think there's a bigger agenda afoot here. I can't sign that document." And she said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "I'm not going to debate with you. I'm not going to debate with you about this." She said, "I'm not going to debate it. What is it you object to? I'm not going to debate with you about it. I think there's a bigger agenda afoot here." Well, let me state very clearly here. This is not a legal document. We don't intend it to be a legal document. What you're doing is you're taking a poll of your county commissioners to find out what their morality is. That's what you're doing. You are setting the groundwork to run a political campaign to throw these idiots out of office. If they won't talk to you, if they won't listen to you, if they don't believe in guaranteeing your private property rights, then we need to throw them out of office. And that is what this is about. So what do we do with this county commissioner who says there's a bigger agenda afoot here? We put a campaign together and we say we're running office against him. He's got some kind of wacky conspiracy theory against protecting private property rights. You just flip the issue on him. You have asked the one question that everybody in the county, every property owner wants the answer to. You've made it as simple as possible. You haven't attacked their plans. But here's the fact that you and I know. You cannot implement Agenda 21 without usurping private property rights. So you don't have to bring up the UN. You don't have to talk about our common core. You don't have to talk about any of this. You just talk about your property, and they can't wiggle out of it. And these guys back here, the only reason that they have power, the only reason that they can achieve what they're achieving is because these guys give it to them. And if they're going to give it to them, then throw them out of office and put people in who won't. And these guys will dry up and blow away. They can't do anything if these guys don't rubber stamp it. They'll do everything in their power to crush them, but if you put people in with principles who believe in private property, who believe in the ideals of the Constitution, these guys are done. And that's what you have to understand. And you have to get angry about it, and you have to go after them and get them out of your town. Go sit down, Darcy.
Take a bit of it.
Yeah, well, we got it. Yeah, we work on it. Yeah.
Graffiti issue.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate that. So, this is what we're dealing with. Somebody said to me, "Tom, if you're telling people these kind of policies or our plans like this, aren't you telling the other side our tactics?" The fact of the matter is, I don't have a hidden agenda. I will show them everything we just showed right here, this video on YouTube, whatever, and they'll know exactly what I'm telling you. But the fact of the matter is, I'm asking them one simple question. What are you going to do to protect our private property rights? I'll give them all this
I've got all that information. We've got a booklet back on my table. It's $6. We've got one on smart meters as well. Get the 2 of them for 10. But this information and the resolution is right in there. The resolution is not designed, I mean, John Anthony and I put this together on my dining room table. We came up with this idea based on what we knew. However, your information, your situation is always going to be different. You've got different people to work with, you've got a different situation. Adapt it the way you need to. Do not try to make it a legal document. I had a very educated PhD in Charlottesville, Virginia, who took it and added a whole bunch of stuff to it that was legalese. It's not the point. We are taking a poll is what we're doing. Keep that in mind. But adapt it any way that you need to. The other thing, I had some people in another state who wrote me a note to tell me what they did. They took the resolution and they mailed it by certified mail to every single one of their county commissioners. Guess what she reported to me? Not a single county commissioner answered that letter. You know why? Because they could sit and hide in their office and they didn't have to. What you're doing here is you're calling them out in public. That is what is absolutely essential. Do not do this alone. The lady who did it for me in Southern California, Southern Virginia, did it alone, and it was never heard again. What has to happen is when they're standing here, when you're presenting it to them, and they say, no, we won't sign it, then you need 10 more people to stand up and say, why not? Why not? Why won't you protect my property rights? And when you've done that, you come back the next week, now this time, have 50 people out in the foyer of the meeting hall with their pictures on a poster as you're carrying it around saying, why won't you sign a document to protect my private property rights? What are you hiding behind the scenes in the back rooms? Now, if you've got a newspaper that goes along with you, terrific, but I bet you don't. Putting a series of letters to the editor together will be very effective. But organize it. Do not write one letter and send us in. Have a committee of 5 or 6 who write letters, all maybe hitting different aspects of it. You've done this research on who these NGOs are. Wait until they begin to write back to you on letters and have answers ready. Go after them. And this is the time you use that information. Citizens of the committee of the county, did you know that this organization was working in Florida and they were putting this kind of a program together and did this to that community, and they are funded by George Soros or somebody else, and this is where it's all, now you destroy them. Final thing that I want to share with you, as you put this kind of a campaign together, you can bring the media in, and you can bring maybe media from another city in or something if you've got a real campaign. The idea is to create energy. What you're doing is laying the groundwork down to run candidates for office, to throw them out. I talked to a very sharp political operative in Virginia the other day, who's a Tea Party operative, and works in Washington. And he suggested that we not run a candidate against one of these county commissioners, we run 2. One of them is an attack dog. He goes after him with everything you've got, everything, throw at him. Chances are he's going to be too vehement to be elected because he'll turn people off. But you run a more moderate candidate. Not moderate in his views, moderate in his tactics. He's a little more reasonable. But every time the attack dog gets up there and attacks with everything he's got, the more moderate candidate says, yeah, Commissioner, why don't you answer that question? Eventually, the attack dog will see that he's not going to be elected. He throws his support behind the more moderate candidate, and hopefully that's enough to throw the guy out of office. So it's just something I want to share. It's very important, ladies and gentlemen, that you keep your heads up. This is a massive movement. They are very happy to see you walk away in defeat. Nameless, faceless bureaucrats wielding power in the name in back rooms, untouchable and unseen, is not freedom. Agenda 21 proposes a global regime that will monitor, oversee, and strictly regulate our planet's oceans, lakes, streams, rivers, aquifers, seabeds, coastlands, wetlands, forests, jungles, grasslands, farmlands, deserts, tundra, and mountains. They've even got a whole section regarding and protecting and regulating and protecting the atmosphere. It proposes plans for cities, towns, suburbs, villages, and rural areas. It envisions a global scheme for healthcare, education, nutrition, agriculture, labor, production, and consumption. In short, everything in our lives. There is nothing on, in, over, or under the earth that doesn't fall under the purview of some part of Agenda 21. We who oppose it, frankly, don't accept the premise that we must destroy our human civilization in order to protect the environment. We believe in free markets and free societies where people make their own decisions and develop their own property. And we fully believe that the true path to a strong protection of the environment is through private property ownership and limited government. Those who promote Agenda 21 do not believe in any of those ideals. And so we will not agree on the path to the future. Don't be sucked in by some kind of attempt to compromise with you. There's no compromise with tyranny. In short, our fight is a clash of the age-old philosophy of life. Freedom to live as you choose, or continued by an unseen, controlled by an unseen hand. There's very little middle ground in that. The United States has never been part of a global village in which the rules for life have been handed down by some self-appointed village elders. We are a nation of laws that were designed to protect our rights to our property and our individual life choices while keeping government in reign. We oppose Agenda 21 precisely because it is an agenda to transform our nation into the exact opposite view of government. As I said, I know that many of you can become discouraged. Some of you who just entered the fight looking at how massive it is, how far it's come, think, there's no way, we've lost the republic, it's over, we can't do anything about it. Do not despair. Do not hang your head in defeat. Be energized. Every action you take, whether you win or lose, helps to expose their lies. And that's why they fear you. In cities and towns across the nation, real opposition is being stirred. Thousands of Americans have now engaged in this battle. Look at it from my perspective. In 1992, for 18 years, I, Henry Lamb, Michael Kaufman, and Michael Shaw, and Michael Chapman were the only spokesmen in this country on Agenda 21. We held 10 national conferences, and we had the same 100 people every year. We said, hey, it's Old Home Week, how y'all doing? Year after year after year. The last one, we had 300 people, and we had 100 people on the internet. And people who came to that had never been involved in the issue before, and it went home and started, and it began to move up. I've never been more energized because I'm amazed by what is going on. And already, more than 150 cities have ended their memberships in ICLEI. At least 7 state legislatures have introduced anti-sustainable legislation, even the Republican Party. And I believe that a revolution has begun, and that if we can maintain freedom in our own community, that we can maintain it in our nation. At a recent international meeting, ICLEI was expressing its frustration that it can't gain new members, especially in the United States, because of you. What we have made ICLEI and sustainable development political poison, and cities are refusing to join. The American Planning Association is in a panic, unable to understand how we have made this a national movement. APA is conducting boot camps to train its people to combat our little ragtag band. They are changing documents and tactics. All they can think of is that we have some massive hidden funding driving us. So they issued this order to their troops. I've got the document. To counter us, it says, in newspapers, articles, blogs, websites, whatever, they're telling their people to charge over and over again that big oil is paying, the Kochs are promoting it like mad. These are not concerned citizens worried about United Nations, but representatives of big oil out to preserve their turf. Did you know that about you? I just released an article saying, funded by Exxon? Whoops, didn't get the check. Never got a dime from any of those people. So, for the first time, as As I see what's happening across the country, as I have the energy, I can clearly see that if we stay vigilant, vigorous, if we refuse to hang our heads in despair, and if we take the offensive, just as I just showed you to do, then we will succeed in crushing it. Thank you.